Marcus pushed the door open. His bride, still in her white gown, veil trailing down her back, was standing less than 2 feet from Reverend Moore. And then she kissed him. Not by accident. Not in confusion. A kiss with history in it. Adrian opened her eyes. She saw Marcus. Her entire body went rigid. And in that hallway, in the house of God, while 100 people waited in the next room to celebrate this marriage, something shattered so completely that no version of that day could ever be put back together again. What Marcus saw in that hallway took less than 10 seconds to see, but it would take months to understand. Because the kiss was not the beginning of the betrayal. It was just the moment the betrayal finally ran out of places to hide. There was a woman who had walked down that aisle knowing what she was carrying. A pastor who had stood at that altar with a Bible in his hands and a secret in his chest. And a man who had loved so honestly, so completely, so without suspicion, that the people around him had used that love like a roof over their heads. This is the story of what happens when a most sacred moment of a man's life becomes the stage for someone else's unraveling. And why sometimes the thing that breaks everything open is also the thing that saves you. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop your location in the comments. I want to know how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to where this day began. The morning Marcus Cole was supposed to become a husband, he woke up before his alarm. He just lay there in the early stillness, staring at the ceiling of his hotel room with a quiet smile on his face. The kind that comes not from excitement, but from certainty. The settled, peaceful certainty of a man who believes he's exactly where God intended him to be. He was 31 years old. He had prayed for this. He had waited for it. He had built himself into the kind of man he believed a woman like Adrian deserved. And today was finally the day. His best friend, Damon Webb, a long, loud, endlessly entertaining man who had been Marcus's roommate in college and somehow never fully left his orbit, came through the connecting door with a garment bag over one shoulder and 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "You're already up?" Damon stared at him. "Man, I specifically set an alarm so I could be the one to drag you out of bed. That was going to be a whole moment for me." Marcus laughed and sat up. "I couldn't sleep. Nervous?" Marcus thought about it. "No," he said honestly. "Just ready." Damon set the coffee down and studied him for a second. He had known Marcus long enough to tell the difference between a man performing happiness and a man actually feeling it. This was the real thing. He could see it. "She's a good woman," Damon said. Marcus nodded. "She is." And that's what made everything that came later so unbearable to understand. Across the city, in a sunlit bridal suite on the 4th floor of a boutique hotel, Adrian Hollis sat in front of a vanity mirror surrounded by white roses, warm lamplight, and the quiet, careful work of a makeup artist. She was 30 years old, and she was widely considered by most people who knew her to be not only beautiful, which she was, but composed, graceful. The kind of woman who moved through even difficult moments with a stillness that made others feel calm. But her hands were in her lap, and they would not be still. Her maid of honor, Camille Fontaine, noticed first. Camille was sharp in the particular way that close friends become sharp over years. She had learned to read the small things about Adrian that other people missed entirely. The slight delay in her smile. The way her posture tightened when she was withholding something. "You're doing that thing with your fingers again," Camille said, not looking away from her own reflection as she fixed her earring. "I'm Fina. You've checked your phone 4 times since I've been in this room." Adrian reached for her champagne glass. "It's my wedding day, Camille. I'm allowed to be a little. That's not wedding nerves." Camille looked at her directly in the mirror. "I know your wedding nerves. This is something else." Adrian's smile came a half-second too late. Before Camille could push further, the suite door opened and Adrian's mother, Gloria Hollis, swept into the room in a silk blouse and a cloud of expensive perfume. Gloria was a woman who had spent 30 years being the most well-put-together person in any room she entered. She was magnificent at surfaces. She was extraordinary at them. "Adrian." Gloria adjusted the veil with practiced hands. "Sit up straight. You look like you're dreading something." "Mom, today is a blessing." Marcus is an exceptional man. He is stable. He is present. He is exactly what you prayed for. Gloria's voice was firm with love that didn't know how to soften. Do not let nerves turn into something that embarrasses this family. Adrian swallowed. Yes, Mom. Camille watched Adrienne's face in the mirror and said nothing. But she did not stop watching. The church they had chosen was a beautiful, full congregation on the east side of the city. Not small and intimate, not cathedral grand, but the kind of mid-sized historic church that felt like it had absorbed decades of genuine community into its walls. White floral arrangements ran along both sides of the aisle. Thin gold candles burned at the altar. Sunlight came through the stained glass in colors that moved across the pews like something living. By the time guests had filled the sanctuary, the energy inside was electric. Marcus stood at the front, fully dressed, completely still, his hands clasped in front of him. Damon stood beside him and leaned in. Marcus, breathe. I'm breathing. You're not blinking. Marcus blinked deliberately, and Damon laughed under his breath. There we go. The music shifted, and every head in the room turned toward the back. Adrian appeared in the doorway. Even from this distance, in this light, Marcus felt his chest close. She was wearing a gown that seemed constructed entirely of softness and grace, and she moved through the sanctuary like she had been born for exactly this entrance. Her father, Winston Hollis, a quiet, deeply dignified man who rarely showed anything in his face, walked beside her with visible pride. Marcus forgot everything. He forgot the audience, forgot the cameras, forgot that his own breath had gone somewhere without him. She is something, Damon murmured. Marcus couldn't speak. When Adrian reached the altar and looked up at him, her smile arrived, wide and warm. But something moved across her face in the fraction of a second before it settled. Something Marcus didn't catch in time. Something that was gone before his love-filled eyes could name it. Hey, she whispered. Hey, he whispered back. Then Reverend Calvin Moore stepped forward. Reverend Calvin Moore was a commanding presence. 54 years old, 22 years of pastoral leadership, a man whose sermons had brought hundreds of people to their knees and whose personal counsel had guided entire families through their darkest seasons. He was not simply well-respected. He was beloved by this congregation. The moment his deep, resonant voice filled the sanctuary, the room fell into reverence. Dearly beloved, he began, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and in the presence of these witnesses to celebrate what I believe is one of the most sacred acts two people can commit to, the covenant of marriage. He spoke about love as a choice made daily. He spoke about honesty as the foundation that outlasts every storm. He spoke about the kind of commitment that refuses to disappear when feeling does. In the fourth row, an older woman pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. Near the back, a young couple leaned slightly toward each other. Every word Reverend Moore spoke landed with the weight of a man who lived by those very principles. Or so everyone believed. Then came the vows. Marcus turned to face Adrian fully. His voice was steady, but thick with emotion. Adrian, from the moment I understood what it meant to love someone, I wanted to love them the way I plan to love you. With honesty, with patience, with everything I have. I promise to show up for you on the beautiful days and the hard ones. I promise to never stop choosing you. The church was utterly silent. Adrian blinked twice. Then she began. Marcus, I promise to be your wife. I promise to honor you, to walk beside you, and to protect what we are building. She paused on the word protect, just briefly, just for a beat, and then continued. I promise to choose you. The rings were exchanged. The blessing was spoken. Reverend Moore raised both hands over the couple and said, What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. The sanctuary erupted. Applause, laughter, shouts of joy. The organ swelled. Children jumped. Cell phones captured every second of it. Marcus kissed his bride as the room kept cheering around them. And in that moment, his happiness was so real it practically had weight. He had no way of knowing that somewhere in the direction of Reverend Moore's private office, his entire life was about to walk into a wall. The transition from ceremony to reception was organized joy, controlled chaos, the best kind. Guests poured into the lobby and adjacent halls, forming clusters of laughter and conversation. The photographer directed family groupings. Children bolted between adults' legs. The catering team set finishing touches on the reception room just down the main corridor. Marcus moved through the space in a warm, joyful daze, shaking hands and receiving embraces from people who loved him. His mother, Della Cole, a woman whose quiet strength and deep faith had held their family together through things that would have broken others, held both his hands and looked at him with tears tracking silently down her face. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "So proud." Marcus kissed her cheek and looked around. "Where's Adrian?" "She was just. I thought she wanted to touch up her makeup," Della said. Marcus smiled, nodded, and turned back to accept another congratulation. But 2 minutes passed. Then 4. Damon reappeared at his elbow. "Hey, the coordinator wants to know where you two are for the bridal party entrance. She's freshening up. I'll go find her." Marcus moved through the crowd easily, moving toward the bridal suite where the women had gathered before the ceremony. But Camille was standing outside the suite. Alone. Marcus slowed. "Hey, is Adrian in there?" Camille looked at him. Just for a second, something moved behind her eyes, the look of a woman deciding something. She said she'd be right back. She went toward the offices. "The offices?" Marcus blinked. "The church offices?" That's what she said. Marcus walked, past the lobby, past the coat closet, down the side corridor that led toward the administrative wing of the church, the quieter half of the building where the sounds of the reception could still be heard, but only faintly, like music from another life. The overhead lights were warm here. The floor was clean polished wood. Every door was closed, except one, Reverend Moore's study. The door stood a few inches open, and through that gap came the sound of voices, low, hushed, urgent in that specific way voices get when they're trying not to be heard. Marcus stopped. He did not know yet what his body already knew, because his heart had not yet caught up with the sudden concrete in his chest. He stepped closer. Reverend Moore's voice first, strained. "This cannot keep going. Not like this. Not here." Then Adrienne's, "I know. I know." The words hit Marcus differently than they should have if this was simply a pre-reception prayer or a quiet moment of counsel. There was something in their texture, in the specific exhaustion of the pastor's voice, the particular shame in Adrienne's, that told him before he saw anything. He pushed the door open. Adrienne stood in her wedding gown, veil trailing down her back, the white silk of the skirt pulled around her feet like something sacred. Reverend Moore stood less than 2 feet from her, still in his clerical robe, his hands lowered. And as Marcus watched, Adrienne lifted her chin and kissed him. Not a confused accident, not a stumble, not a misread moment, a kiss with history in it. Marcus stood in the doorway and felt the entire architecture of his life buckle beneath him. Adrienne opened her eyes and saw him. Her body went rigid. "Marcus!" He couldn't speak. Not immediately. His jaw was set so hard it ached. He stood very still, very straight, and he looked at both of them with a stillness that was more frightening than any explosion. Reverend Moore took 1 step forward. "So, don't." Marcus's voice came out low, controlled, and absolute. "Don't say one word to me. I need to stop here and ask, because this part gets into something heavy. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you fully trusted, someone who was supposed to be safe, drop a comment below. You don't have to share details. Just know you are not alone, and this story is for you." "Marcus, please." Adrienne's voice cracked. "Let me explain." He held up a hand. Just one. And that single gesture silenced her more completely than anything he could have said. His eyes swept from her face to the Reverend's and back again. Then, very quietly, he said, "How long?" Neither of them answered quickly enough, and that delay told him everything. The hallway could not hold the sound of it for long. Within minutes, Damon appeared at the far end of the corridor, drawn by something in the silence where noise should have been. His expression shifted the moment he saw Marcus standing in the doorway with that look on his face. Damon had known Marcus for 12 years. He had never seen that look before. Then Camille. Then Della. Then Adrienne's parents, who had been searching the lobby with polite, increasingly anxious smiles. They arrived at the corridor to find Adrian in her wedding gown, weeping. Reverend Moore pale and still. Marcus standing between them like a man who had been turned to stone from the inside out. Gloria Hollis arrived last. One look told her everything, and the composure she had spent her whole life perfecting cracked down the middle. "What happened?" she breathed. No one answered. Marcus turned to look at her, and when he spoke, his voice was the quietest it had been all day. "Your daughter was kissing the Reverend who just married us." He said it like a sentence being filed away in some permanent record. In his office, in her wedding dress. The corridor exploded. Gloria's hand went to her mouth. Winston Hollis closed his eyes like a man absorbing a blow. Della made a sound she could not help. Grief and shock in a single exhale. Damon turned away from everyone, jaw working. Reverend Moore stepped forward with both hands raised. "There has been a serious misunderstanding." Marcus rounded on him so swiftly that even Damon took a half step back. "A misunderstanding." Marcus said it back to him, voice still quiet, still controlled. "Is that the word for it? Emotions are high right now. If we could speak in private." "You had your private conversations." Marcus's voice finally rose, not into a scream, but into something that filled the corridor from end to end. "You had your private conversations for however long this has been happening. And then you stood at that altar with your Bible in your hands, and you blessed my marriage. You prayed over us. You called a holy." Reverend Moore said nothing. The silence was its own confession. By now, more guests had found the corridor. Word traveled through a church the way water finds low ground. Quickly, inevitably. And as more faces appeared at the end of the hall, Marcus looked around at all of them and felt the humiliation land on him like something physical. He straightened. "There will be no reception," he said. His voice was clear. He looked at no one in particular. "Please take your flowers and your gifts and go home." "Marcus!" Adrian reached for his arm. He stepped back from her hand like it was something hot. "You walked away first," he said. "You just had the courtesy to do it in a white dress." And then he left. Not running. Not shouting. He walked out of that corridor with his head up and his hands still at his sides, and every person who saw him do it understood that they were watching someone holding themselves together by the thinnest, most dignified thread imaginable. Behind him, the wedding dissolved. Children were gathered up. Guests drifted toward their cars in stunned silence. The caterers stood in the reception room with no idea what to do. White flowers sat on white tables in a room that no one had entered and no one ever would. And Reverend Calvin Moore, the man who had stood at that altar and called the marriage holy, stood in a church hallway and watched the congregation he had built look at him with something he had never seen in their eyes before. Doubt. Marcus did not sleep. He sat in the apartment they had not yet officially shared. The apartment that still had Adrienne's decorating touches on the walls, her dishes in the cabinet, the half-unpacked boxes of her things waiting for a life that no longer had a shape, and he sat very still, in the dark, and let the hours pass. Damon arrived at 7 in the morning with food Marcus wouldn't eat, and sat across from him without speaking for a long time. Finally, "What do you need?" "I don't know yet," Marcus said. "Okay." Damon didn't move. "I'm not leaving either way." Della came at 9, followed by his older sister, Renata, a fiercely intelligent woman who had once described her love for Marcus as protective to a fault and meant it as a compliment to herself. Renata walked into the apartment, looked at Marcus for a full 5 seconds, set her bag down, and said, "I knew something was off." "Renata, de la Began. I'm not saying it to say I told him so. I'm saying it because this has been building for longer than yesterday." Renata looked at Marcus steadily. Those counseling sessions. Remember how she used to come home from them? She'd be distracted for hours. And the Reverend always had some reason she needed to come back alone. Marcus stared at the floor. "I thought," he stopped, swallowed, started again. "I trusted him. I specifically trusted him because of who he was. Because he was supposed to be." He couldn't finish. Renata sat down across from him. "He was supposed to be safe," she said. "That's the thing about this. You didn't fail to see it because you were naive. You trusted because you had every reason to trust. The betrayal is on them, not on you." Marcus pressed both hands flat against his knees. "I want to understand how long," he said quietly. "I keep turning it over. Every memory I have from the last 8 months. Every time she came home quiet. Every time she seemed somewhere else, even when she was right in front of me. I'm looking at all of it differently now. Della reached for his hand. He let her take it this time. Son, she said softly, don't do that to yourself. You'll be standing in a pile of evidence that explains everything, and it still won't make it hurt less. I know. He turned his hand over and held hers. I know. From somewhere outside the apartment, the city moved through a perfectly ordinary Saturday. Traffic, kids on bikes, someone with a leaf blower, the world insisting on its own continuation. Marcus looked at the wedding ring box, still sitting on the counter where he'd left it the night before. Not from sentimentality, just from the fact that he'd walked past it too many times without the energy to move it. I was ready, he said, and something in those 3 words carried the full weight of everything. The preparation, the faith, the certainty of the morning before. The man who had smiled at his own reflection and thought, today is the day. I was completely ready. No one answered, because there was nothing to say to that. I know this kind of pain is not fictional for everyone watching. Some of you have been exactly where Marcus is right now, sitting in a room that was supposed to become a home, trying to figure out what's real. Tell me in the comments, how do you move forward from something like this? Across the city, Adrienne sat in her childhood bedroom in a way she had not sat since she was 17, small, quiet, stripped of every performance. The wedding gown was hanging on the back of the closet door. No one had thought to put away properly, and somehow that detail felt like the most accurate thing in the world. Still hanging there, still white, still pretending. Her mother paced. Camille had gone home after attempting once to stay, and after Adrienne made it clear, with a look, not words, that she needed to be without her best friend right now. Because Camille had been right this morning, and they both knew it. And right now, Adrienne didn't have the strength to face Camille's gentle, devastating accuracy. We have to manage this, Gloria was saying, moving back and forth across the pale bedroom carpet. We have to control what people are saying before the story gets bigger than it already. There's no controlling this, Mom. Adrienne's voice was flat. 100 people were in that church. Then we shape it. We say you were overwhelmed. We say the Reverend overstepped. We say, no. The word came from Winston Hollis, who had been standing near the window with his arms folded and his face doing something no one in the family had seen it do before. The particular expression of a man whose quiet dignity has finally met its limit. Gloria turned. Winston. No, he said again, and looked at Adrienne. No more shaping. No more managing. He walked toward her slowly and stood a few feet away. I want the truth. From the beginning. And I want you to tell it to me the way you'd want someone to tell it to you, if you were standing where I am. Adrienne's chin trembled. Adrienne. His voice did not break, but something in it did. How long? She looked down at her hands. The counseling started 8 months ago, she said quietly. I went because I was anxious about the wedding. About everything. The expectations, the pressure, feeling like I was supposed to be something in particular. She paused. Reverend Moore listened differently than anyone else had. He asked about things underneath the surface. He made me feel seen. Gloria started to speak. Winston silenced her with one look. Adrienne continued. I started looking forward to the sessions. Then I started needing them. And then at some point, I don't remember the exact session, the line shifted. Her voice broke slightly. It didn't feel like a line at the time. It felt like closeness. It felt like understanding. And you knew it was wrong, Winston said. Yes. She didn't hesitate. I knew. But you kept going. Yes. The room was very still. And you kept planning the wedding, he said. Yes. Why? Winston's voice stayed controlled, but barely. If you knew this was happening, why did you stand at that altar and make promises to a man who had done nothing but love you honestly? Adrienne looked up, and her eyes were raw. Because I was terrified. I was terrified of what confessing would do to the family, to the church, to you and Mom. I kept thinking I could end it before the wedding. I kept telling myself it would stop. And when it didn't, she stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. When it didn't stop, I told myself I would marry Marcus and it would disappear. That distance would fix it. Gloria sat down slowly in the chair by the dresser, like her legs had made a decision her pride hadn't agreed to yet. Sin does not disappear because you dress it in white, Winston said. The sentence landed. Adrian flinched like it had touched something physical. I know that now, she whispered. Did you love him? Winston asked. Marcus. A pause. Yes. Then what you did was not only cowardice. Winston's voice was measured now, like a man choosing each word with care. It was a cruelty, because a person who is loved honestly and still chooses deception has chosen to use that love as a hiding place. He exhaled slowly. Do you understand that? Adrian broke. Not quietly, not with dignity. She bent forward and wept in a way she had not permitted herself to weep in years, without management, without control, without any thought for what it looked like. And for the first time in all of this, her father let her. He did not comfort her immediately. He stood and watched her face what she had done, because sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to shorten the reckoning. Camille had been right. The nerves that morning weren't wedding nerves. They were the nerves of a woman who already knew the walls were closing in, and chose to walk down the aisle anyway. 2 mornings later, Reverend Calvin Moore walked into the church conference room and discovered that a pulpit cannot protect a man from himself. The room held 5 people. Deacon Bernard Okafor, the senior elder and board chairman, a measured, silver-haired man who had served this congregation for 30 years and who looked at Reverend Moore now with an expression that contained no trace of the warmth that usually accompanied it. Beside him sat Elder Patricia Wynne, known throughout the church for her refusal to allow titles to substitute for character. The other 3 board members sat in quiet gravity. No one stood when Reverend Moore entered. He set his Bible on the table. The gesture felt different than it ever had before. You know why we've called this meeting? Deacon Okafor said. Edo. Reverend Moore kept his voice composed. Pastoral. Controlled. The voice people trusted from 22 years behind a pulpit. And I want to say before anything else, what happened was wrong. It was a moment of weakness and poor judgment, and I take full responsibility. Elder Wynne's expression did not soften. A moment, she said. He looked at her. You told me once, she said, that the pastoral role requires us to guard boundaries more carefully than anyone, precisely because people come to us in their most vulnerable states. Do you remember saying that? He said nothing. I'm asking you genuinely, Reverend. Do you remember saying it? Edo. So when you describe what happened as a moment of weakness, I need you to help me understand something. Her voice was even, but direct. Was it a moment that happened across 8 months of counseling sessions? Was it a moment that involved private meetings, extended conversations, and a woman who came to you seeking guidance for her marriage? Reverend Moore lowered his eyes. Deacon Okafor leaned forward. The board needs the truth, not a shaped version of it. The truth. Was there an emotional and physical relationship with Adrian Hollis that predated this ceremony? A pause that lasted long enough to be its own answer. There was emotional involvement, Reverend Moore said finally, which crossed into physical territory on one occasion prior to the ceremony. The room absorbed that. One occasion, Elder Wynne repeated. He did not correct her. The door to the conference room opened. Every head turned. Donna Moore Wolktin. Reverend Moore's wife was 53 years old and had been what anyone who knew her would describe as an uncommonly dignified woman. Not because she performed dignity, but because her character seemed to naturally produce it. She had served this church alongside her husband for 2 decades. She had raised 3 children largely alone on Sundays, because Sunday belonged to the congregation. She had defended him in conversations he would never know had happened, had answered for his distance and his distraction and his habit of being fully present for everyone except her with the steady, private faith that ministry was simply hard. She stood in the doorway now, and her face was the face of a woman whose patience with a lie had finally reached its natural end. Donna, Reverend Moore said, getting to his feet. You don't need to be here. I've been not being in rooms I should have been in for a very long time, she said. I think I'm past due. Deacon Okafor gave her a quiet, respectful nod. She sat. She looked at her husband with no anger in her face, which somehow made it worse. Anger can be argued with. What was on Donna Moore's face was past arguing. It was the clear, sorrowful clarity of a woman who finally had the facts to fit the feeling she'd carried for years. "I want to ask you one thing," she said. "And I'm not asking for this room's benefit. I'm asking because I have been your wife for 27 years and I deserve it." She held his gaze. Was Adrian Hollis the first? The silence that followed was the truest thing Reverend Calvin Moore had produced in that room in years. Donna closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she simply said, "There's your answer, Bernard." She rose without drama and walked out the door. Deacon Okafor watched her go. Then he folded his hands on the table, looked at Reverend Moore, and said, "Effective immediately, you are suspended from all pastoral duties, preaching, and counseling responsibilities, pending full investigation by the board and a formal denominational review." He paused. 22 years of service does not undo what has been done. If anything, it makes the depth of this more sobering. Reverend Moore opened his mouth. Something about his years, about his record, about the hundreds of people he had helped. Elder Wynne stopped him. "The congregation you led trusted you with their most sacred moments," she said. "Their grief, their healing, their marriages." She looked at him steadily. "And you chose yourself." There was nothing left to say after that. The Sunday that followed was the hardest service the church had ever held. The parking lot was full, fuller than usual, if anything, because scandal fills seats the way nothing else does. People arrived early. Some came because they were grieving. Some came because they needed to make sense of things. And some, though none of them would have said so directly, came because they wanted to see what the wreckage looked like. The sanctuary that had hosted Marcus and Adrienne's wedding only 9 days earlier was now hosting the quiet, unasked-for funeral of everything that ceremony had represented. A visiting minister had been brought in to lead the service. But before worship could even begin, Elder Patricia Wynne rose from the front row and turned to face the congregation. She was not a woman who used volume when clarity would do. "Church," she said, and the room went still immediately. "This community has experienced something devastating. A sin was committed in this house. It was public, it was significant, and it has wounded people who do not deserve to carry wounds." A murmur moved through the pews. "We will not pretend otherwise." Her eyes swept the room with quiet authority. "There will be no covering. There will be no management of appearances. There will be accountability, full, appropriate accountability, because that is what this moment requires and what these people deserve." She paused. "But I also want to say this clearly, because I know what happens in congregations when scandal breaks open." Her voice did not rise, but intensified. "Exposing sin is righteousness. Enjoying the exposure is wickedness. Marcus Cole's pain is not a story for your dinner table. Adrian Hollis's ruin is not your favorite topic for the week. The fall of a pastor is not an excuse to abandon the God he misrepresented." Several people shifted in their pews. "This is grief," she said. "Handle it accordingly." The visiting minister stepped forward after she sat and added, quietly, "And if this season has revealed anything, let it reveal not only the failure of one man, but the ways we build trust in institutions instead of building it in truth." Outside, under the same November sky, Marcus was not in that sanctuary. He was sitting in his car in the parking lot of a grocery store 6 miles away, and he was having a conversation on the phone with Renata that he would later remember as the moment something in him started to shift. "I keep going back to the beginning," he said, "to when they first connected. To every session I felt good about because I thought she was getting the support she needed." He pressed his head back against the headrest. "I was grateful to him. I told him more than once, 'Thank you for being someone she can talk to.'" Renata was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Marcus, you cannot carry that. I know. I mean it. That gratitude was real. It came from a real place. He used it. That is not a thing you did wrong. That is a thing he did." Marcus stared at the November sky through his windshield. "I don't know how to separate the faith from the person," he said. "I don't know how to walk back into a church and not see his face." "You don't have to solve that right now," Renata said. "I know. And you don't have to forgive anyone on a timeline someone else sets." "I know. But I also know you," she said. "And I know that you are not a man who is built to carry bitterness." That's not who you are. This is going to hurt for a long time. But it is not going to take you. I refuse to let it take you. He almost smiled. You sound very certain of that. I am certain of that. Marcus looked at the sky for another moment. Then he said, Renata, yeah. Don't let me disappear into this. I won't, she said. I promise. This moment right here, a wounded person asking someone they trust to hold them accountable to their own healing. This is what community is supposed to do. Did someone in your life ever hold you together when you couldn't hold yourself? Tell me in the comments. That kind of loyalty deserves to be recognized. 3 weeks after the wedding that became something else, Adrian asked to meet Marcus. He said no. She sent word through Camille asking again, saying that she was not coming to ask for the marriage back or to defend what she had done. She was coming to tell him the truth. All of it, without filtering it, without managing it, without protecting herself. He waited 2 days. Then he said yes. They met in a small room at a community center. Not the church, not either of their apartments, nowhere with weight or history. A plain room with chairs and a window and nothing much else. Neutral ground, if such a thing existed after all of this. When Adrian walked in, Marcus almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different, exactly, but because the particular quality she'd always carried, that polished, composed stillness, was simply gone. She was wearing a plain coat over simple clothes, her hair pulled back with no ceremony to it. And she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had stopped managing the distance between her real self and her presented self because there was nothing left to manage it for. She sat down across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus finally said, You asked for this. I know. She folded her hands in her lap. I'm not going to ask for your forgiveness tonight. I don't think that's mine to ask for. I'm going to tell you what you deserve to know before I walk down that aisle. He said nothing. He waited. She told him the truth. All of it. From the beginning, from the first session that crossed a line she should have named and didn't, to every point at which she could have chosen differently and chose to continue instead. She told it without softening, without redirecting blame, without the half-truths and shaped narratives that had characterized everything since the corridor. She told him about the fear that drove it, the cowardice, the terror of confession, the way she had told herself that marrying him would silence everything else. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long time. Marcus looked at the floor, then back at her. Did you love me? He asked. Yes. No hositashchen. Then why did you keep going? Adrian met his eyes. Because I loved you, and I was still capable of choosing myself over that love. That's the truth. Her voice was steady but raw. I thought love was supposed to make that impossible. But it didn't, and I am ashamed of that. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, if I had never opened that door, if I had never walked down that hallway, the reception, the pictures, everything after, she understood what he was asking. Yes, she said, the same answer she had given in the cold open, in that plain room weeks later. I would have gone through with all of it. The words hit him again, even knowing them. The second time wasn't easier. He looked at his hands, then back at her. Thank you, he said. She blinked. You're thanking me? For telling the truth. His voice was tired and honest. You should have told it before the wedding. But you're telling it now, without hiding, and that matters. Even now, that matters. Adrienne's eyes filled. I don't forgive what happened, Marcus said carefully. But I'm releasing it. And I'm releasing you from the space you've been taking up inside my anger. Because I don't want to carry you there anymore. Adrian pressed a hand to her mouth. That does not mean I come back, he continued. That does not mean we find our way to something else. It means I'm choosing not to let this define the next 20 years of my life. She nodded, tears falling freely. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know, he said, and it sounded like he believed it. I know, 6 months is not a long time, but it is long enough for a man's posture to change. Long enough for the difference between grief that's being processed and grief that's being housed to become visible in the way someone moves through a room. Marcus Cole, 6 months out from the worst day of his life, was not the same man who had stood at that altar. He was, if anything, more himself. The softness he'd always had was still there, but it had been joined by something harder. Not bitterness, not armor, something more like clarity. The particular clarity that comes from having had your most sincere illusions stripped away and choosing to stay open anyway. He was working 2 mornings a week at a youth mentorship program attached to a community center near his apartment. He had started there the month before, mostly because Renata had signed him up without telling him, which was exactly the kind of thing Renata did. He had arrived that first morning intending to spend an hour and stayed for 4. The young men in the program reminded him of himself at 17. Earnest, ambitious, carrying a complex mixture of hope and wariness. He understood that mixture now in a way he hadn't before. On a Saturday morning in late spring, he was in the parking lot of the center helping unload boxes of donated athletic equipment when Damon appeared carrying what was clearly supposed to be a heavy box, but that he was pretending was light. "You look good," Damon said. Marcus glanced over. "Don't make it weird. I'm serious. You look like yourself again." Marcus took the box from him. Damon did not object and carried it toward the loading bay. "I feel like myself," he said. "Different version, but myself." "What's the difference?" Marcus thought about it. The old version trusted the wrong things. I trusted the institution more than I tested it. I trusted the role more than the person. I thought proximity to something holy made a person holy. He set the box down. "I don't think that anymore. You're still going to church. Different church. Smaller. Nobody there knows my name from a headline." He half smiled. "It's good." Damon leaned against the wall. "And Adrian?" A pause. "She's doing the work," Marcus said. "Camille told me. She's not performing it. She's actually doing it. That matters, even from a distance." "Does it still hurt?" "Yeah." No hesitation, no shame in admitting it. "It still hurts, but it's not the kind of hurt that stops everything anymore. It's more like he searched for it. It's more like a scar. It's there. It tells you something, but it doesn't keep you from moving." Adrian was at this point several months into work at a women's transition shelter on the south side of the city. Not in a prominent role, not as a counselor or administrator, but in the kind of daily, unglamorous work that involves sorting donations and sitting with women who needed someone to listen without judgment. The irony of that last part was not lost on her. She had arrived at this work through what she could only describe as an inability to return to the life she had been building. That life, the polished exterior, the carefully managed appearances, the continual performance of having it all together, felt like a skin she couldn't put back on after shedding it so completely. So she had started here. Small, quiet, earning nothing in terms of social currency. Learning to be useful without being seen. One afternoon, she was stacking supplies in the shelter storage room when one of the women from the overnight program appeared in the doorway and watched her for a moment. "You're always quiet," the woman said. "Most volunteers talk to fill the space." Adrian smiled a little. "I used to do that. What stopped you?" She considered the question seriously, learning that silence is sometimes more honest than filling it. The woman tilted her head. "You've been through something." "Yes." "Something you did, or was something done to you?" "Both," Adrian said. "Mostly something I did." The woman nodded slowly, like that answer had confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Those are harder," she said, "when it's something you did." "They are," Adrian agreed. "But I think they're also the only way to actually change." Reverend Calvin Moore had left the city. After his suspension, after the denominational review that confirmed what the board had suspected, after Donna's quiet, irreversible departure from their shared home, he moved into a small rented apartment in a smaller city 2 hours east and took an administrative position with a nonprofit that had no connection to ministry. No pulpit, no title, no Sunday morning congregations looking at him with love and trust. Just an ordinary desk, ordinary tasks, the ordinary, undecorated consequence of what he had chosen. People who had known him before might not have recognized him in this season. Not because he looked different, exactly, but because the particular quality that had always surrounded him, that effortless, almost gravitational authority, was simply gone, stripped away. He moved through his days with the quieter energy of a man who was learning, late and hard, what it meant to be accountable for his own character rather than protected by his own reputation. Some mornings he sat at his desk, and genuinely did not know what he was supposed to do next, which was perhaps where the real work could finally begin. Donna had not filed for divorce immediately. She had not said definitively that she would or wouldn't. She had taken herself and her grief and her 27 years of quiet sacrifice, and she had gone to stay with her sister, and she was figuring out what her own life looked like without the architecture of his role at the center of it. She sent him one text 3 months out. "I don't hate you, but I'm not ready to forgive you yet, and I'm not going to pretend to be." He read it 4 times. Then he wrote back, "I understand. I'm sorry. Take whatever time you need." And he meant it genuinely, without strategy, without an eye toward the outcome, which might have been the most honest thing he'd produced in years. 7 months after his wedding day, Marcus Cole walked back into a church for the first time. Not the church where his marriage had been built and broken in the same afternoon. A smaller congregation across the city. A storefront space with folding chairs, and a praise team of 6, and a pastor who wore a plain shirt and spoke with the slightly exhausted sincerity of a man still surprised by grace. Della sat beside him, Renata on the other side. The service was simple. The music was warm. Nobody stared at him. Nobody knew. When the pastor stood to speak that evening, he said something that stopped Marcus mid-breath. "The thing that broke your heart," the pastor said, scanning the room without knowing who he was landing on, "might also have been the thing that protected your destiny." Marcus closed his eyes. He sat with that for a long moment. If the door had stayed closed, if the corridor had stayed silent, if Adrienne's face had not appeared in that doorway, if the kiss had stayed hidden and the lie had stayed dressed in white, and he had walked into that reception and stood at that head table and made a toast and danced with his new wife and gone on the honeymoon he had spent 3 months planning, if all of it had continued, he would have called it marriage. He would have called it blessing. He would have built a life with full sincerity and full love on a foundation already hollow underneath him. The pain had been real. The humiliation had been real. But the exposure, the terrible, devastating, merciful exposure, had been something else too. After the service, they walked out into the evening air. The sky was a deep amber at the edges, blue above, the particular colors of a late spring evening that seemed almost too deliberate, too beautiful to be accidental. Della touched his arm. "How are you feeling?" Marcus looked up at that sky for a moment. "Like myself," he said. And then, quietly, like someone who got saved from something he didn't know he needed saving from. Della nodded. Her eyes filled. She didn't try to stop them. Renata, to her credit, said nothing. She just stood there beside him, which was exactly what he needed. This story is painful. I don't want to soften that. A man loved someone honestly, prepared himself thoroughly, trusted his community, and walked into a day that should have been one of the best of his life, and instead had his world dismantled in a hallway. That is real pain. It deserves to be treated as real. But here is what I also want you to carry away from this. The thing that exposed the betrayal was not cruelty. It was a door left slightly open. A set of footsteps in a quiet corridor. A husband who was simply looking for his wife. And what that moment revealed, as devastating as it was, saved him from something worse. It saved him from years built on deception. From a marriage that had already been broken before it was spoken into being. From investing his whole self into a foundation that would have eventually collapsed anyway. Just later, when more had been built on top of it, and the fall would have been even harder. The pain was the warning. The humiliation was the rescue. Not everyone who has been betrayed gets that clean of a removal from the wreckage. Some people carry damage for years before they understand what they were carrying. Some people never understand at all. Marcus was spared that particular long suffering. He was hurt completely, quickly, and in public. And because of that, he knew. He didn't have to guess. He didn't have to wonder. He could grieve the truth instead of living inside a comfortable lie. That is not nothing. That, in fact, may be everything. There are people watching this right now who are carrying something they already know is broken. A relationship that stopped being honest years ago. A trust that has been eroding so slowly you could almost believe it wasn't happening. A silence that has grown between you and someone that should never have that much space in it. I want to say directly to you, the truth, even when it arrives badly, is better than a beautiful lie that you're trying to maintain with the last of your energy. A painful truth told in time costs something. A beautiful lie costs everything. Don't wait for a hallway to make the decision for you. If this story moved you, share it. Someone in your life needs to hear it. If you saw yourself somewhere in Marcus, somewhere in Adrian, somewhere in the people who loved them and watched helplessly, leave a comment. Tell me where you found yourself in this. And if you haven't subscribed to Oravan Stories yet, this is the moment. Stories like this one exist to remind us of what's real, what matters, and how we survive the things that were meant to break us. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like, and keep watching. There are more stories where this one came from. I'll see you in the next one.